Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson, a.k.a. Gibby, a.k.a. K-Bar, a.k.a. Suspect. No, I'm just kidding. What's going on, Gibby?
Not much, man. I was just thinking about our intro song and about at CrimeCon, we were going to do a meet and greet, potentially at a bar or something, or a restaurant or something like that.
Smooth jazz.
I thought, man, if there was somebody with a guitar playing, I slip them a little bit of money and they play our theme song for us.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So speaking of Gibby as a suspect, I got to tell this story before we do our Patreon shout outs. And I wish I had the person's name, but I don't have it with me right now. Somebody sent me a message on Facebook and they just wanted to know, does Gibby really have to wear an ankle monitoring anklet or bracelet or whatever you call it? I got a kick out of that.
Yeah. You didn't answer, did you?
I don't want to say what I said,
Yeah.
but got to leave the mystery intact.
Yeah. Green light's flashing. We're safe.
All right, so got to give a shout out to our Patreon supporters, Jessica Poole, Carol, Kristen McConnell, Nada, Joe DeVee, Amber Stoll. I actually made an error last week and reversed the order, so they didn't match up with the one that we were doing on True Crime All the Time. So I'm kind of going back in time, so to speak. So sorry I messed that order up, but didn't want to leave the shout outs undone.
Definitely appreciate current, past, continuing,
Future. Yeah, we do. I mean,
Yeah.
I know we say it, so it probably sounds like a broken record, but I'm not going to stop saying it. We appreciate the people that support us financially, but also through social media and word of mouth. I mean, we got people just telling their friends about us. We appreciate that. I definitely don't want people to think that, it's all about supporting us financially. I think I've said it before. There's a million ways to do it. You can go through our homepage, click on the Amazon banner, do your shopping there. We get a little kickback, not much, but there's a ton of ways that don't cost anything. Tell your coworkers.
Yeah.
Help spread the word on social media. I mean, if you're in the podcast pages, throw us out there every now and then. It's stuff like that is really cool. And just follow us and interact with us. Gibby and I love that. Those of you that already interact with us, how much we love it, how responsive we are. We try to get back to everybody. We love our new Facebook group, True Crime All the Time.
Our group Facebook page.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to say that.
Yeah.
Somebody made that for us.
About 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and I almost hate to try to say her name. I know I'm going to butcher it. I'm going to go with Jalasso Pretty Thunder and hope that I'm not butchering the first name.
She'll let you know.
She will. I told her how much I appreciated it. Gibby and I are not what you would call tech savvy, but
Obviously, I'd find a way to get this
ankle bracelet off.
Yeah.
So we appreciate people doing stuff like that for us, and we've really loved it because it's a closed group. People, your friends won't be able to see what you write in there. They won't know that you're a true crime nut if that's not something that you share to the world. But you can talk about the show. We get on there. We interact with people. It's just another cool way for all of us to talk about the show and new show ideas.
I love the feedback. I love the different thoughts people have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really cool.
You know what I've been seeing a lot lately, Gibbs, that I like is a lot of people giving their opinions on the unsolved, like what they think could have possibly happened. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that.
And there have been some people that have really come up with some very interesting theories that you and I haven't thought of because, again, we're not rocket scientists. We don't know everything. People that are listening, they're forming their own theories. Share them with us because we love it. And don't forget to check out True Crime All the Time podcast if you don't already listen. At the same time that this episode drops, we're releasing part 2 of Arthur Shawcross. You definitely do not want to miss that.
That's a good one.
This guy is one of the most evil people I think that ever walked this earth.
Yeah. Terrible. Sick.
Gibby's still having nightmares over the research for that one.
Yeah. Hard to eat a sandwich anymore.
It is. I mean, he was something else. But listen to it. Do not miss that episode. And if you didn't listen to the first one, definitely listen to that one first. All right, Gibbs, so let's talk about Unsolved. We are covering the Capital City murders. And this is one that you brought to my attention I had never heard of. So we are in Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Home of the University of Wisconsin.
The Badgers.
The Badger land.
Did you say Badger 3 times?
Yeah, I did. Badger land.
Badger. But it's got some other names. We talk about that all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Any case or any serial killer, they get so many different nicknames. So on top of Capital City Murders, you might see it called Mad City Murders, or you might see it called the Capital City Killings.
Yeah. Because it's the capital.
I change it. Maybe we are rocket scientists. Now we have to get serious. We can joke at some points, but
Yep.
But this case is fascinating. And it's about the abduction. And maybe I used the word fascinated wrong or incorrectly, and even interesting.
Intriguing.
To me, it is fascinating, but I could see how people would say, you're talking about murders. How can that be fascinating? I mean, obviously, I'm not happy that these things happened, but I am fascinated by true crime and Unsolved, trying to figure things out. And on our other podcast, knowing who did it, but trying to figure out why. What's the reason behind it? So again, I don't know. People may take offense to that. Hopefully, I'm using it, why I'm using the word the way I am.
But I mean, either way, let them know. Send them an email.
Why are you always trying to get people to email me?
Just email him. He likes it. Or call the 800.
Nobody ever calls the voicemail.
Yeah. Well,
We need a new voicemail. Not since Rachel. That's the last voicemail we've gotten.
well, she would say she saved the best for last. Yeah.
That she shut it down because there was no other voicemails needed.
That's right.
We love Rachel. So this case is about the abduction and the murder of 8 young women. And all 8 of these women, Gibbs, they had ties and were associated with the University of Wisconsin. And we mentioned that's in Madison. And this kind of had a long span, right? It goes from 1968 to 1984. It's quite a long period of time of unsolved murders, if they're all connected. If you think of an unsolved case, famous case like Zodiac, I mean, that didn't have a very long period of time where the killings occurred. Now, it's captivated people for almost 50 years, but it sure didn't have a span of killings 16 years long. Now, most of these 8 women, they had some similar characteristics. Most of the 8, they had long hair parted in the middle, and like we mentioned, some type of connection to the University of Wisconsin. 2 of these women were actually killed on university property. So Gibbs, I want to do something that we normally don't do. I want to kind of just run through these 8 victims and say their names and say the year that they were killed. I just want people, before we dive into the detail, to kind of get an idea of this span that we're talking about. Because you have Christine Rothschild, 1968, Deborah Bennett, 1976, Julie Ann Hall, 1978, Julie Spearschneider, 1979, Susan LeMahieu, 1980, Shirley Stewart, 1981, Donna Mraz, 1982, and then Janet Rash, 1984. 8 women over 16 years, some that happened one year after the other with some big gaps in between some of them. So we're going to go through it in detail, but I just kind of wanted to give like an overview of the victims and the timeline because it is a long period of time. All right, Gibbs. So we start with the first person that was murdered, and that was Christine Rothschild. She started at the University of Wisconsin in 1967. She graduated with honors from Senn High School in Chicago. So she came from Chicago, decided to go to the University of Wisconsin. Her father was the president of a local brokerage firm. From everything that we read, Gibbs, Christine really enjoyed school. She loved her classes. She took it very seriously. She had designs on becoming a journalist. That was her goal after graduation. It was said that she was a very attractive girl. She had long, blondish brown hair. I believe she was attractive, Gib, because she did a lot of modeling. She did some Sears catalog modeling and some other types. So in May of 1968, there's a student at the university. His name is Philip Van Valkenburg, and he was cutting through some bushes, going over to talk with some friends. He had to go up to their window to knock on the window so that they could go around and let him in. And as he was going up to the window, he stopped because he saw the lifeless body of Christine Rothschild laid out. It would be determined that she had been stabbed 14 times in the neck and chest. Gibbs, she had broken ribs. Both of her upper and lower jaws were broken. I mean, this was a brutal murder.
Violent, man.
Very violent. If that wasn't enough, if all of that had not done it, she had also been strangled, and it was determined that she'd been strangled by the ripped out part of lining from her own coat. And this next detail is very strange. The killer had taken her mittens and had jammed them into her throat. So now that I think about that, is that strange? Because it's only strange if that was done post-mortem, in my opinion. If that was done prior to her death, that could have been a way to keep her quiet while something else was going on. But she was not sexually assaulted. So this was not...
Yeah, this sounds like a crime of anger. You've really got to dislike somebody to stab them 14 times. Clearly, maybe the ribs were broken in the struggle. 14 times, that's overkill.
You're right about that. It seems like a crime of passion, or when I say crime of passion, I mean intimacy, anger, that type of passion, because she wasn't murdered during a sexual assault, or that wasn't the end game because she was not sexually assaulted.
Yeah, so it just makes you wonder, how passionate or angry or whatever you have to be with somebody to go to that level. And then, like you said, I think you're probably right. I think maybe the gloves were probably stuffed in her mouth to keep the screams down. I don't think it was really something that happened after, but, we really don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. But if it was before, that does make some sense to me. If it was done after, because it says, shoved, jammed, whatever you want to call it, into her throat, not like placed in her mouth.
Besides that, and she was also strangled. So, and her jaw was broken.
Both.
You know how hard it is to break
lower.
How hard it has to be to break a jaw?
Yeah, I don't know. But the bottom line is, I guess what we're trying to convey, this was a very, very violent murder. And it has aspects, at least in my way of thinking, Gibbs, of being somebody that had some connection to her. Because it was not a sexual assault. So then you have to think of, well, what was the reason for the murder? And what was the reason for the extreme violence? And usually that comes back to some emotional component, right? Whether it's anger, jealousy, something. Now, police pursued some suspects, but ultimately they were never able to bring anyone to trial. Their theory on this thing was that Christine had been killed early in the morning while she was out jogging. The coroner would come out and say that and rule the cause of death as the stab wounds to the chest. And specifically, they said 12. Now, she was stabbed 14 times.
Yeah, 2 in the neck and 12 in the chest.
We said that the murder occurred in May. And as the summer goes on, this case is becoming colder and colder. At one point, they offer a $5,000 reward for any information relating to the murder, but they've got no new suspects. Like we said, they had a couple, but they didn't pan out. They never find the murder weapon, and the number of leads starts to dwindle significantly. We've talked about this. As they always have to do at some point, there was just nothing else to go on. This became a cold case. Now, one really interesting fact about this is that, they had collected some evidence from the scene. They had a bloody handkerchief that they believed to be a man's handkerchief. They found a broken black umbrella. All of this stuff was eventually lost and could never be located. Now, this was 1968, but you have to think, I bet you there's possibility some of that had DNA, could have contained some type of DNA of the killer.
And what we kind of see in these cases for this capital city killings is that there's a lot of evidence that is misplaced or lost. So it'll kind of trend throughout this whole story.
Wait, and it's funny because that's kind of been a trend for you and I in some of these unsolved cases. Now, we had one, the Jennings 8, that was probably straight out a lot of police misconduct.
Well, we know for sure it was.
Because people were charged. We're not saying that most of them are not police misconduct as much as it is probably negligence, just bad police work. Another strange thing that happened was on June 29th, there was a huge explosion on the campus of the University of Wisconsin. Somebody had lit 2 sticks of dynamite outside the front doors of one of the administration buildings, and it was said that this explosion blew a 4-foot hole in the steel reinforced concrete floor of this entryway.
Man.
I mean, the power of TNT. Man.
Oh, absolutely.
2 sticks is enough to do some serious damage.
Well, this was around the time of the Vietnam War, right?
It was.
So a lot of protesting.
You got to figure it was probably some type of protest. But what it did was take away a little bit from the investigation of the Christine Rothschild murder. I'm sure there were a lot of resources probably put on this one. And what I found interesting was that we talked about a $5,000 reward for information related to Christine's murder. Then you find out they put a $10,000 reward out for information leading to the arrest of the bomber who didn't kill anyone.
Yeah. They were more concerned about that than finding the killer.
I found that very, very strange. So no one ever claimed responsibility, and they never arrested anybody for the bombing, but you just have to wonder what it did to her case, because there was another bombing the very next year. And in this one, it was actually the building right next to where Christine was found dead. And in this one, a researcher actually died because of this blast. They did convict 3 men for this bombing. All right, Gibbs, so we have to jump forward in time to July 21st, 1976. Deborah Bennett, 20 years old, she is found in a gully by some land assessors. And when they come upon her, her body is completely charred, decomposed. It had been about 11 days since she had last been seen. She's reported missing on July 10th. So about 11 days. And the last time she had been seen was walking barefoot down Lofts Gordon Avenue. Gibbs, what I found very strange was that Her brother reported her missing the day that her body was found. So that was July 21st. But she had not been seen since July 10th. That's 11 days.
And that is a long time. But maybe the fact is that she wasn't living at home anymore. So time goes by and it's a week and you think, well, I haven't heard from my sister. Maybe I need to reach out to her. So I can see maybe how 10 days could build up pretty fast on somebody.
It was said that she was last seen walking barefoot down Lofts Gordon Avenue, and apparently she used to live on that street and was evicted from the place that she lived at on that street. So I don't know, Gibbs. I mean, walking barefoot, was she homeless at that point? Did not have a place to stay?
And maybe that's why no one heard from her, because she had no way to communicate.
And she had no fixed address at that point.
Right.
So they would do an autopsy on Deborah's body, and the result was that they knew she had been dead for at least 10 days. So if we go back, that would mean she was last seen on the 10th alive. She would have had to have been killed either the 10th or the 11th, is what the coroner was saying. But they never could come up with the exact cause of death. So Gibbs, we mentioned that her body was found charred. And the only way that they were able to ID her was from a fractured collarbone that she sustained in the past and dental records, which to me is kind of strange. You would think dental records alone would be enough. As the investigators were working her case, obviously they're talking to her friends or talking to everybody. They started to find out a lot about Deborah. They found out that she had been evicted, she had recently signed up for welfare, and that she was currently living at the Cardinal Hotel in downtown Madison. There were some co-workers. There was a previous co-worker of Deborah's that indicated that she had been into drugs and what this woman called a few other things. So not sure what those few other things could have been. But she had been arrested just the month before her death because she was a suspect in a burglary. But people liked her. I mean, a lot of good things were said about her. Apparently, she was just a very good-natured person. And the thought was that she met the wrong person. And that person ended up taking her life. But investigators, Gibbs, they just had nothing to go on. They had no suspects. They had very little evidence. There just wasn't much to work with. But something really strange happened about 3 weeks after her body was discovered, because the key to her hotel room was mailed back to the hotel. No note, nothing, no return address, nothing to identify who had mailed this key. But it's a very interesting thing that happened.
Yeah, it's bizarre, man, that someone took the time to send the key back. That's really weird.
Well, it could be bizarre, and it could be that a stranger found the key.
It was just being nice and sending it back for the hotel.
That could be.
Yeah.
But why not put a return address on it? Not putting a return address on it, to me, makes it sound like
shady.
You don't want anyone to know what you're doing. I think, why send the key back at all?
Yes. Why send the key back if it was the person that killed her? Because clearly they went to extreme efforts because they burnt the body. You know, I'm guessing to try to destroy evidence, or who knows why they burnt the body.
From the killer's perspective, what do I care if the hotel gets their key back?
Yeah.
I don't care at all.
Yeah.
I just killed somebody and I set him on fire. I'm having a really hard time with that. We could be reading too much into it. It could just be
someone found it and was nice enough to send it back.
Being nice and mailing it back. But anyway, either way, it's an interesting thing to talk about. So just like with the Christine Rothschild murder case, this case too was eventually classified as a cold case. They had nothing to go on, nothing new to work. There was another interesting fact, Gibbs, that, well, at least I found it interesting. And that came from the hotel manager at this Cardinal Hotel. Because when they were asked about Deborah, they said she never stayed there at all. She checked in, but no one ever saw her again after that. They never saw her come back to the hotel. Now, one thing we have to talk about, Gibbs, because it's going to come up, is hitchhiking. And today it's almost non-existent, right? But back in the 60s and 70s, people did hitchhike. I mean, it was an actual form of transportation. Some people relied on it to get from point A to point B. Unfortunately, we know that a lot of people were killed as a result of hitchhiking back then.
Sure. We just did a story not too long ago, well, very recently, on TCAT about two cousins that picked up a couple hitchhikers and killed the, one of the girls.
Yeah, it was very dangerous.
Yeah.
But it was also relied on by some people.
It was the main part of transportation back then. It's how you got around. Nobody had an issue with it. But we do know a lot of people die from it, from all the different stories we've covered back in that era.
So I guess it's just something to think about. Could she have hitched a ride with the wrong person and been killed that way? So the next person to be killed was Julie Ann Hall. And Julie was 18. She was a library assistant at the Wisconsin Historical Society. She was found on June 21st, 1978. And she was found completely nude in a shallow grave on a road about 14 miles from the city of Madison. Now, the coroner figured out that she had been dead about 3 days. So that puts her, gives about the 18th of June, give or take.
Give or take.
And they also came out with her cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. Now, the last time Julie had been seen was at a local pub called the Maine King Tap. And she'd been there with some friends, and everybody said that everything with her seemed to be totally fine. She wasn't agitated. She didn't seem to be having any problems. But like the other victims, she shared some similar characteristics. She had long brown hair parted in the middle. But if there wasn't much to go on with the first two Gibbs, there was even less to go on in the murder of Julie Hall. Investigators really had nothing. I mean, they had not a shred of evidence. They never had a single suspect.
No, it's getting difficult to get any type of leads on any of these.
Well, and that makes a murder pretty darn hard to solve.
Really difficult, for sure.
If you got no leads, you have no evidence, and you have no suspects. All right, Gibbs, so we're jumping forward almost a year, March 27th, 1979. 20-year-old Julie Spearschneider vanishes. What they know is that they had some witnesses that said that she had been at this club called the 602 Club most of the night. And at some point, she decided to hitchhike to a friend's house. So here again, we're coming back to hitchhiking. Now, after her disappearance, there were media reports, right? It was on the news, places like that. And a man comes forward to the police and says that night he actually picked up Julie along with another man, and he dropped them off at the corner of Johnson and Brearley. This guy gave a description of the man to the police, but they were never able to identify this guy. And this guy, I assume Gibbs, never comes forward.
Yeah.
They never find out who this guy is.
And they really never say that they investigate the person that picked him up anything greater than what we just talked about.
So Julie worked at this place called the Red Caboose Daycare Center. And all of her friends and coworkers, they described her as reliable and a friendly employee. There was a lot of people that came together to offer a reward for any information relating to locate. I mean, this is not a death. They cannot find her at this point. And 2 years would go by until April of 1981. There's a 16-year-old kid, and he's hiking along the Yahara River. And this is in the town of Dunn, Wisconsin. So while this 16-year-old is hiking in Dunn, he ends up discovering some bones. And they would identify these as the remains of Julie Spearschneider. But obviously, Gibbs, we're talking about 2 years later, and we're talking about bones. And because of this, they were never able to figure out the cause of death.
Yeah, I think they're just lucky to identify it as her at that point.
All right, Gibbs. So if we look at the last three victims we've covered, we had Julie Hall that was killed from a blow to the head. And then we had Bennett and Spearschneider. Their bodies were too decomposed, and in the case of Bennett, burnt, to even figure out what their causes of death were. But investigators, they're looking for patterns. And the one thing that they did notice was that all three of the victims were attractive, they had long hair, and they lived in Madison. But what they're not talking about is the very first victim at this point, Christine Rothschild. And I think this is where, and in a lot of the research you'll see this, they're starting to think that that one is outside of the others.
Yeah, I think they start dissociating it, with the group of the women. I think some people think that was more of a act of rage, passion, right? And these other ones were just senseless murders.
Well, and if you look at the timing, right? Christine Rothschild was 1968. That was a full 8 years. And then you get to Deborah Bennett, 76, Julie Hall, 78, Julie Spearschneider, 79. The rest of these are all going to happen relatively close. So it does maybe make sense that they start to exclude, I don't want to say exclude, but start to think that Christine Rothschild is not part of the rest of these in terms of timing, in terms of the way that she was killed. There seems to be a lot of differences.
Yeah, I think they're maybe separating that there could be two suspects, right? Two different suspects in these killings.
Yeah, and basically two different incidents altogether.
Right.
Incidents, probably not the right word, but groupings.
Groupings, yeah.
So we have to jump back in time because we fast forwarded to April of 1981 so that we could talk about them finding the remains of Julie Spearschneider. But there was another murder in April of 1980 while Julie was still missing. And that was 24-year-old Susan LeMahieu. And she was found near the Madison Arboretum. Now, Susan had graduated from Madison East High School in 1974. Now, it was said, Gibbs, that Susan was both mentally and physically disabled. So Susan was actually living in Allen Hall on the campus. And that's where she was reported missing from on December 15th, 1979. So she was missing for 5 months. She wasn't actually going to college at the University of Wisconsin. Allen Hall was a treatment facility for individuals with mental and physical disabilities. So initially, police did not even think she'd been murdered. One possibility was that they thought that maybe she had just wandered off and had gotten lost. But when they did the autopsy, they quickly figured out that she had died of numerous stab wounds to the chest. LeMahieu's body was so badly decomposed that they had to use dental records to identify her. And the one thing that was said, Gibbs, was they could not figure out, I don't think they were ever certain whether she was murdered at that arboretum or near there, or whether her body had been moved there post-mortem. So unfortunately, there's just not much information out there about Susan as far as evidence, suspects. Again, I just don't think they had much to go on. But 3 months later, in July of 81, the body of 17-year-old Shirley Stewart was found in some woods just north of Madison. Now, Shirley was the youngest of all the victims at 17, and she had been missing since January 2nd of 1980. That's a year and a half. The last time that Shirley had been seen was leaving her job at the Dean Clinic. And obviously, Gibbs, I mean, they didn't find her body for a year and a half. It was impossible to determine her cause of death. But because of the timing and because of, the way that all of these victims had a similar look to them, detectives are starting to put this together and think that they've got a predator that has killed all 5 of these women. And this is where they start throwing the words serial killer around.
Took them a while, but I mean, I can see why.
Oh, I can see why too, because we're having a hard time putting these together because there's not much evidence.
Right.
I mean, really, what you have is women in Madison of a similar age, we'll say. These are all young women, attractive with a similar look. It was nearly a year before another young girl would be mysteriously killed in the Madison area. On July 2nd, 1982, Donna Mraz, 19 years old, was found behind Camp Randall Stadium after midnight. Now, I know Camp Randall Stadium, it was said that she had been stabbed repeatedly, and investigators figured out that Mraz was on her way home from her job as a waitress. And the strange thing about this murder, Gibbs, to me, is that whoever killed Donna Mraz left behind her money. She had a recent paycheck, keys, didn't take anything, right? So this is not a robbery. They ruled out sexual assault, but yet it was a very brutal murder. I mean, she had been stabbed a bunch of times on the left side of her chest, and they had gone directly into her heart. She had stab wounds to the face, on her arms. I mean, this was not, like I said, it was very violent.
Yeah, I mean, it flashes me back to 14 years before this, to Christine Rothschild.
Yeah, to the very first one we talked about. You're right, because you have to think about motive. I mean, what is the reason? I mean, there should never be a reason to kill anybody, but what is the reason that the killer had?
Yeah, if you didn't sexually assault the victim, if you didn't take their money or any of their valuables, then what was the reason behind killing them besides anger?
Well, and that's gets back to what we talked about in the first death. If the motivation is not money or sex, then normally what is it? And I would say that it has to be personal.
Yes, I believe that. Maybe it was somebody jealous of her, obsessed with her.
Right. So that's where you get into areas like that. I just think, Gibbs, it's very rare to have a random killing. It happens, don't get me wrong, but that is a rarity. Most murders are committed for a reason. And I think a lot of it is money, sex, or some personal reason. Vendetta, like you said, obsession, anger, envy, something like that. Emotion. And that's also the reason why a lot of murders are solved. If you truly have, now we've covered some on True Crime All the Time, where you have a serial killer that solely picks out random individuals. That person is unbelievably tough to identify.
Absolutely.
So getting back to the murder of Donna Mraz, there was somebody in the vicinity at the time that she was murdered. They heard screams. They looked out of their window and they saw Donna running away, but this person never saw the killer. So by the time the police got there, Donna was dead. And investigators theorized that she probably died very shortly after she was seen running and fell to the ground. That's the type of wounds that she had. But again, other than the person that saw her running, they had no other witnesses. They had no motive, like we talked about. They couldn't figure that out. Like all of the previous murders, they just had very little to go on. So 2 years after Donna's murder, the police actually had a suspect that was in prison that they liked, but they did a bunch of testing and they just couldn't put the evidence together. And the suspect later died in prison. So I don't know if there was anything there to it, Gibbs. They couldn't make anything out of it. But for some reason, they liked him. They liked him for the murder. Now, again, did they like him for this and for the others? That part I don't know. I couldn't find. So we got to get on to the final murder in this series. And it took place on November 17th, 1984. And some deer hunters in the town of Buena Vista, they found a body. And it would be the body of Janet Rash. She was partially clothed. It actually took a while for them to identify her. Now, Janet was a University of Wisconsin student. She was a business major in her third year. She had a job on campus. She was last seen on October 11th, 1984, and her friends reported her missing on October 15th. Now, the last time she was seen was when a friend dropped her off on Highway 54 in the town of Buena Vista. And this was just about 2 miles west of where her body would be ultimately found. Her body was pretty badly decomposed, and so that made determining the cause of death very difficult, but they came up with that they thought she had been strangled. The decomposition also made it very hard to pinpoint exactly when she'd been killed, but they thought it was somewhere between 7 to 10 days before her body was found. So that would have put it, November 7th to the 10th, somewhere in that time frame.
That makes sense.
It makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense. And I'll tell you why I think that. If the last time she is seen is on the 11th, then that means she was not murdered for an entire month. And that's very interesting to me because you have to wonder what was going on during that month.
Yeah, absolutely. Was she held captive? Was she doing something on her own? We don't know
the answer, but that's a long time.
It is a long time.
So there were a couple interesting things about the Rash murder that I think we have to talk about, Gibbs. One is that her body was exhumed at some point to test for DNA. And obviously this was later on when DNA was more of a thing, but all the tests failed to find any sort of DNA evidence. And you got to think, it was a long time. 20-some years had gone by. And the other interesting thing was that at some point, and this was years later, many years after her death, there was a local newspaper that ran an article about her murder, about the cold case. And sometime after that article ran, an anonymous letter came in. Police were very tight-lipped about what was in this letter. The only thing they would say, and I guess what makes it very interesting, is that they said the letter contained details that the investigators thought that only the killer would know, or somebody that had very detailed knowledge of the killing would know. And to me, that's very interesting because this is not a month after the murder, right? This is 20-some years, let's say, after the murder. So is that somebody just seeing that article and wanting to play around? But if so, how do they know these very detailed facts?
Right.
Or is this somebody, so I go back to a case like Dennis Rader BTK, where he was quiet, and then all of a sudden, there started to be a lot of coverage about his old crimes. And that really kind of kickstarted him into his communication with the cops and the media. I don't know if this is maybe something along those lines.
Well, it could be, right? I mean, they're trying to get it back out there. Like, hey, I know what happened. I did this.
It could be.
I'm still out here.
But again, and because the case is ongoing, it's unsolved, we can't know everything because the police won't put out everything.
Right. They've got to hold something back to help verify stuff.
So, Gibbs, we've talked about the 8 murders. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at that you can look at these murders and group them in different ways. And you'll see them grouped a lot of different ways. You'll see the first and the last kind of taken off. You'll also see the ones where the victims were killed on school grounds, grouped together, and then the rest grouped separately. Well, and the other thing is, we're saying that the capital city is 8 murders.
Yes.
But you will also see, because that we're including Janet Rash.
Right.
But there are a lot of people that do not include her. And so sometimes you will see 7. And sometimes you will see Christine taken out completely. And people say that, well, it's only 6.
Right.
Going back to what I said, you can group these in a bunch of different ways. The only thing that we know is that there are 8 unsolved murders. You can group them however you like.
Yeah, you can 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, the linkage, how it's done, is dependent on how the murders are perceived.
I would agree. And I mean, you've had people come out and say, you know, there was a detective from the University of Wisconsin Police Department. He came out and he said that he thought Mraz was completely unrelated to the others, which is a little strange because, you know, you could group, that's the other thing we haven't mentioned. You can group the stabbings, the victims that were killed with brutal, multiple stabbings together. And she was one of those. So again, it's hard for me to say conclusively that none of these are connected, but I also can't say any of them are connected. Does that make sense, Gibbs?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, number one, there's just very little evidence to go on. Now, we might have a little true crime all the time crossover here, Gibbs, because in 1984, serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, he told investigators that he and his partner, Otis Toole, had passed through Madison many times on their way to Minnesota, and he confessed to several of the Madison murders. The problem with Henry Lee Lucas, now don't get me wrong, he was a vicious serial killer, but he also was known to confess to a bunch of things he didn't do.
Oh, he just liked the notoriety?
Oh, yeah. I mean, once he was caught, he confessed to so many different...
He just threw his hand up. Oh, that was me. I did that.
Yeah. And also, I think investigators, they even were able to figure out that he was in prison during some of the murders. And here's the other thing about Lucas. He would confess to something, and then later on he'd turn around and say, you know what? I didn't do that one. I'm taking it back. And he did that in some of these Madison cases as well. So I kind of discount him altogether just because he's a known liar. And he liked the fame. He liked the notoriety. But there were detectives in Madison that liked him for a couple of the murders at least. And I think those were probably ones where he was not in prison. So they couldn't conclusively say there's no way he could have done it. I think specifically they thought he could have been involved in the murders of Hall and Spearschneider because they went to question him, right? It's not just the fact that he confessed, but once he did, investigators actually went to talk to him, and it was said that he knew some of the details that they didn't think he should have been able to tell them. But there's no way to know. And there's no way to know on any of this. So I guess the question is, was this a serial killer that killed all or a portion? Right? I don't want to get back into that whole grouping talk because it gets confusing. And I'm not saying that all 8 of these women were killed by the same person, but could a serial killer have killed a certain number of them? I definitely think that could be the case.
So for me, I kind of line the stabbing victims together because it just seems so similar. The same type of stab wounds, just the same. Everything just lines up really good for me on those. So I kind of box those together.
And I think there's something to that. And then you have the ones where by the time they found the bodies, what you had were essentially, in some cases, skeletal remains.
Right.
They couldn't tell you what the cause of death was. So that makes it very hard.
Yeah, so they could have been stabbed.
Right.
Who knows? We don't know. That's the problem.
So Gibbs, as we're wrapping this up, the last thing I want to talk about, and I think you might have alluded to it in the very beginning, I think that some of the various police departments that were involved in these investigations have come under fire over the years for how they handled some of this evidence that was involved in these cases. I mean, I think it's been discovered, Gibbs, that a lot of the evidence has been lost. I mean, one of the most glaring to me was that the remains, the actual remains of Julie Spearschneider were disposed of in 1981, along with a gold earring that was related to the case. So to me, that's just very strange.
Oh, I think so. I even think
I'm not saying somebody threw it away on purpose, but
No.
for it to be thrown away,
yeah, why would you ever get rid of any evidence?
that is just, it's very strange.
I mean, the same thing happened in the Stewart case. I mean, her remains were turned over to the funeral home.
And then 12 years later in 1993, documents related to the Spearschneider case, they were destroyed. So really, from my understanding, all they have left are some videotaped interviews from back in the day. But almost all of the other evidence, and again, they didn't have much evidence in these cases, but what they did have, a lot of it has been over time either lost or discarded or destroyed or thrown away, whatever you want to call it. So because of that, I think it makes, we always talk about this in the Unsolved, how likely is it that some of these will be solved? And in a lot of our cases, they have DNA.
Yeah.
They have evidence that they just need to match to somebody. Well, if you've lost most of the evidence, that's really going to make it hard to solve some of these.
Yeah, on a Gibby 0 to 5 scale of this being solved, this is, to me, would be a 0. I know you want to leave some hope out there.
I was going to say maybe a 1. Give it a 1.
Okay. We'll give it a 1
for the families.
For
at
one,
least.
at least for the families, I'll give it a 1.
It is tragic, and you feel for all the families. And I hate to put down police departments. I really do. I don't like to bash, but if they really did lose or throw away some stuff, I hate that. I mean, it just, that really is going to make it next to impossible to solve some of these cases that are so old already that they're tough.
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right, Gibbs. So that wraps it up for the Capital City murders and another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.